Hello, I am Michele Leclaire, Director at Buckham Gallery. Today, I am joined by Jim Arendt, whose exhibition, Selvage, explores the shifting paradigms of labor and place through materials that resonate with work and people engaged in it. Selvage is on view at the gallery through July 24th. Additionally, his work may be viewed on our website at buckhamgallery.org. First, I would like to say thank you to the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art Genesee Grant Program made possible by the Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Funds, your tax dollars at work. An introduction. Jim Arendt is an Associate Professor of Visual Arts and Gallery Director at Coastal Carolina University. He received his BFA from Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and his MFA from University of South Carolina. He has participated in residency programs, including the Fields Project in Illinois. His work is exhibited internationally in numerous group and solo shows. Influenced by the radical reshaping of rural and industrial landscapes in which he was raised, Jim investigates how individual lives are affected by transitions in economic structures. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Michele. It's so wonderful to be invited to show at Buckham Gallery. I was wondering if we could look at some of those sponsors again on that slide. Some people may know that this is a really special show for me because I grew up in the area. And so being able to work as a professional artist for almost 20 years and then come back and see my name associated with the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation and remember the support that they gave to young artists when I was in high school. The Flint Institute of Arts was a special place for us to visit, and to be able to have that in our community and know that they're still doing the work today is such a great thing. And I'm happy and excited to be affiliated with these people and appreciate their support. I'm sure you do as well.
Oh yes, I mean, thank goodness for all of our great sponsors and organizations, but they have kept Flint thriving during very challenging times, and especially like nonprofit organizations like this. You know, so many places have had to close or temporarily or permanently during like the pandemic, and we have been very fortunate. So.
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenging year for cultural institutions across the country.
Yeah.
And of course, that's really what launched me on my travels towards becoming an artist. We're exploring and modeling some of those challenges that people that we know common, people that we grew up with in the area have a lot of firsthand experience with, and that's become the reason and the people who end up in my artwork so often. So this is really nice.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to bring up another installation view real quick. And let's see. So I'd like to start with the title for the show, Selvage. Could you explain the term selvage and how you came to work with denim?
Yeah, of course. So the title is kind of a lot of artists, we love titles for our shows, and sometimes it gets challenging to come up with new ones after a while. But selvage comes from kind of the sound of the word, right? To go to a salvage yard, I'm sure is an experience that a lot of people have had. I mean, I'm still going to the salvage yard looking for used parts. But in this particular spelling, it's the self edge of fabric. It's the way in which woven fabric at the edges of it is made so it will not unravel. And I really liked kind of the double entendre that the word itself creates about resiliency and about thrift and about some of the values that I like to celebrate within the work itself. And there was a second part to your question, and that was, why do I choose some of the materials that I choose to work in? Well, I studied drawing and painting and had a really great educational experience at Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids. primarily my love and interests there were painting and drawing, and I was always someone who was kind of fascinated with the figure. And the deeper you delve into thinking about craft and thinking about material, sometimes the materials will grab you and lead you in directions. I wouldn't say that necessarily I would have chosen to work in denim because it wants to be pants. It really doesn't want to be, it really doesn't want to be the things that I want to make it do. And so Denim and I are in this kind of locked negotiation where we orbit each other and say, I want you to be people. And it says, well, I want to be this other thing all the time. And so we have to find a way to work together to produce the results. Oil paint is where my studies and degrees ended up in. And I had a professor turn to me once and run his fingers through his hair like this and say, what do you think paint means? And as a young person, I went, what are you talking? Paint? What does paint mean? I just want to make pictures. Like that was but a seed of a question that, because it was such a strange question, a strange materiality question to think about, really caused me to reflect on it. And the longer I thought about oil paint, I thought to think about, well, who's oil paint intended to make pictures of, right? And if you look at the history of painting, it's really a beautiful material for depicting flesh, right? And the reason it's a beautiful material for depicting flesh is because it's like us. It's fatty, it's a little translucent, right? It has qualities that are akin to the thing. But the flesh that it was designed to depict were of the aristocracy or the wealthy or the deities that were being imagined and put on canvas. And so that became a little bit of a logical disconnect. The people that I grew up with, are maybe a little bit further away from deities than the oil paintings that we can see in our museums. Mm-hmm. And so as I cast it around and said, well, what type of material would make sense to make a picture of my dad? Or what type of material makes sense to make a picture about struggle? And so that kind of questioning really led to utilizing denim, mixed up with memories of what I remember of Wranglers from my childhood. I'm probably of an old enough generation that I might be the last kid whose mom shopped at Sagebrush in the Kmart parking lot and, put her fingers in the back of my school jeans to make sure there was enough room that when she bought them, I would grow into them over the year. I remember my dad patching his jeans at my mom's Kenmore sewing machine during the farm crisis of the 1980s. And memories like that were of us using material to make do. And it was an interesting time to grow up in the early 1980s during a lot of changes, right? The downturn of the automotive industry, the farm crisis, things like in my family that I experienced were the auctioning of all of our farm equipment. And so those were the things that I wanted to explore. And as I delved into that content to think about the durability, the perseverance, the persistence of people faced with similar situations, denim became one material among a lot that made more and more sense, much more sense than oil paint. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting thing because that once you kind of open up that Pandora's box of chasing materials that make sense, you find yourself working usually with things that don't want to be what you want them to be. And so that's why I joke and say there's a negotiation that has to happen. I often work with materials like coal or concrete or leather, and those things don't necessarily lend themselves to portraiture. And so there's a process of dancing with the material that you have to ferret out what it will allow itself to be. And it's fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun, but there's a steep learning curve for every time you steer into a new material, you have to investigate what it will allow you to do.
It's a beautiful idea, though, that there is this sort of negotiation between you and the material. You know, there's a give and take, that it's not just you forcing your will on the materials. It's also you're listening to it and having to work with its, you know, parameters or what its abilities even.
Like a telescope, and there's two ends to a telescope that you can look through. And I think as artists, we're trained sometimes to look through the correct end of the telescope, right? That you have an idea and you force the material to do what you want it to do. And I've learned, primarily because of that question, it's like, let me turn the telescope and look at it differently. And you get to things, this isn't a bad analogy, so I apologize beforehand, but it's like when you think about whales, right? A giant mammal that spends its life searching out others of its kind in the darkness of the ocean through song. What a beautiful thing, right? And what do we do with that material that we would hunt in the 19th century? Well, we would boil it down and we would make scrimshaw and, you know, little decorative ship scenes or a light. Like, what a poor use for an animal that carves apart the dark with song to turn it into oil and light. And so if you look at a whale in that way and say, well, what would a whale want to be? You know, you can think, well, maybe a whale wants to be a harpoon and stab at the evil hearts of men. Maybe that's what it wants to be. And you can find examples of that. Like, so there's this beautiful way to look at material, but it's also a challenging way. And I think I can't say one thing without saying the other. It's like there are easier ways to make portraits of people, maybe better ways to make portraits of people. But I'm fascinated with finding a way to amplify the content with the material. And I look for ways to listen to what the material wants to be. And denim is an interesting material because of that. It's made with cotton. It's woven in a very specific manner. I mean, these are the things that are kind of inside baseball, but it's like it's a twill. That's why we can throw our jeans on the floor and we can pick them up and we don't have to iron them. Right? Because of the way it's constructed, it's very supple. And so that lends more meaning, right? That suppleness, that ability to change and adjust. That is what I learned. You know, it would be easy for me, I think, as an artist to stand on my soapbox, and maybe as a younger artist I did, and be like, these were the things that were wrong about the situation that I grew up with. But as you explore more and as you, I think, get as an old man, you start to see the nuance of things. And I enjoy investigating the nuance of the situation, to celebrate people through portraiture and material. I bring a lot of my own content to the piece. It's a little bit about representation and representation of individuals. It's a lot about what I would like to say through representation and what I would like to say about what happened during my time growing up in Flint. And it's a strange thing. I think someone was asking me, it's like, what was it like to grow up around Flint? And it's like, well, I worked really hard, I think, because I thought being successful meant that I had to leave Flint. I didn't see a lot of opportunities for me as a young person to be there. Mm-hmm. And what happened was I've spent my entire professional career modeling the experience and rebuilding that universe that I left. And so it's been this really strange place to exist, to be distant and to be constantly thinking about it. What my work has really circled around for almost 20 years now.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, what's really interesting, and you've touched on several of my questions just in what you have said already, but So one thing when you're viewing your work that I'm struck by is first, the connection to the history of figurative art, but also, more importantly, that the subjects, aren't classical studio models and poses. They seem to be real people. Maybe you could talk about, some of these people that you have chosen to make these kind of grand portraits of.
Yeah, in portraiture has that tradition, right? Portraiture is meant to be something that's an embodiment of an ideal or an individual who's heroic in some way. And again, it's like, I view the people I grew up with that way. They are people who maybe don't view themselves that way, but I look at their trials and I look at the way in which they have gone through life, and I celebrate both the foibles and the strengths of those people that I know intimately, and that's really who these individuals are. Is they're what I call my biological family and my logical family, people who are very intimate. Um, One of the reasons that I choose to work with family is I'm a little bit of a sincerity junkie.
Mhm.
I've spent my entire life making things that are complicated lies that are really real. Representation is a form of fooling someone. And that's what I mean. It's these are flat images. They go through a lot of manipulation to make them appear to be something other than they are. And Picasso famously, I think, stole somebody's quote and said, "Paintings are lies that tell the truth." And I tend to agree with that. It's a complicated form of lying to get at a deeper fundamental truth. And so I work with, this is my niece Erica, my brother's daughter. I pull maybe compositions from more classical sources, and that's something that people can witness. And even though they're make reference to this kind of grand figurative tradition that Western art has, they're made within the vernacular of the material itself. And so they're really real. They're really real. There's no canvas backing. They're not painted on in any way. I work with 7 shades of denim that people donate to me. And so I haven't bought materials in the whole time that I've been making stuff. These are all collaborations with people who want to support the work. They're like, "I've got jeans." And I usually say when we do stuff like this, I'm like, "Hey, if you've got any jeans." And people are so generous. And that's maybe why, maybe that's what art does, right? Art is this thing that we stare at that kind of assembles community for us. And that might be part of the purpose. Is my community was disrupted substantially, and art making is a way to literally patch, to repair and to rebuild some of those things. And I always say, it's like when I say things like I work within the vernacular of denim, that's a fancy way of saying, hey, if they do it in jeans, that means I can do it in the studio. And that's kind of just a general rule that I like to follow. And so jeans are these little gifts of inspiration. If you start to disassemble enough jeans, the embedded text, the stories of where textile manufacturing took place from in various times, the environmental impact of how these things come to be, and all these stories kind of get literally interwoven within the piece itself. And so one of my favorite things in jeans is the text. And I don't know what the insides of any particular person's jeans say, but I found things that say "lucky you" and "straight cut" and "slim fit." And I just have this wall of all that harvested text that I pin up in the studio, and it looks at me. There might be an idea for a piece there at some point, but because of that, even though I'm working with this very limited material, right? It just wants to be pants.
Mhm.
I can turn to things like embroidery and sewing, and these were crafts that I grew up with. And so I feel like it's important for me to both utilize those things and to celebrate those things and make them, expansive, to make sewing and knitting and crochet. Those were things that people did. Everybody had a hot rod in the garage when I grew up. There's always a car project going on. Everybody I grew up with knew how to weld. These weren't special things. Everybody canned. Everybody knew how to do stuff, which has changed in our culture. It's more opaque to figure out how to do things now. We spend a lot of money going to art school to figure out how to do things.
Well, and it's not just like the denim that you're harvesting from the jeans. I mean, like this piece with Megan and the little rivets. I mean, I just love that. Or even in the Catherine piece with her eyes, with the, I don't know if I can make it bigger. I just love the use of the buttons.
Yeah.
You're,
And those little gifts are there in the material, and that's really what I find liberating about working in such kind of a closed system. Is like, as long as I can find it within the material itself, the material tells me what it can be. And so, man, don't tell anybody this, right? This is between just us, right?
yeah.
I love when people give me bedazzled apparel.
Yeah.
That is like the most precious item that comes through the studio. And it's because it's this strange mixture of, when we think of the original purpose of jeans as this, workaday material. Levi Strauss didn't invent jeans, but the copper rivets to strengthen them are what they patented and made famous. And then it takes off as this kind of pop cultural phenomenon. Unfortunately, it's like I'm kind of not interested in the pop cultural phenomenon and more interested in the origins of the material. But I find that difference between high and low culture to be a really ripe area to explore. So all these rivets, like I can tell you the purpose behind why I wanted to do the piece, but all the rivets come off. I think we spent 3 days, my wife and I, cutting rivets off jeans. And my niece, who, you don't get to say I love you to people enough. This is a way of telling somebody you love them through material expression. To me, the rivets almost act like a chainmail shirt, right? One builds up as a small item of protection. And if you were to look really close on this piece at the bottom of her tough leather jacket and knee-high leather boots, and that mixing of street tough and high class, the label I found for the bottom of her zippers reads invisible.
I don't know if I can zoom that for you.
Oh my gosh. I found that, and it was like the perfect ready-made thing.
Yeah.
Because I always felt like, some people demand more attention. Megan always accommodated everybody by making herself invisible. And so this was a way to celebrate her, to make her seen, and to explore, those intimate things that about your family. And I think that's what's difficult, right? I'm going to see my family and they're going to see themselves. These aren't idealized portraits of the people that I love, but they're made with love, and they're made with what I really know about them. And so the intent of representing people I know, and maybe the reason that I work with people I know so well, is because representation is a form of exercising power over somebody's image. And I take that responsibility as an artist really seriously. How are people depicted? Who's depicted? Those are really relevant questions. And so maybe I've cheated it a little bit. I work with people I feel I have some permission or permissiveness. Maybe our love for each other gives me a permissiveness to be more liberal with their representation than I might otherwise be with individuals that I knew less well.
So, Jim, what is the importance of scale in your work? You know, they are all approximately life size, I believe. So
yeah, they're usually life size or a little bit bigger, maybe just
yeah.
bigger than life size. It's an interesting thing. There's a couple different reasons for it. You and I have privately talked about kind of a ethos in my studio, but it's that by choosing to work at a particular scale, that's a choice I no longer have to make. Right. So it makes work a little bit more productive. But there's actually a functional reason for artists to think about scale. And maybe it's not expressed that often, but scale has a function in works of art that I like to opine about when I have the opportunity. I think I have the opportunity here. If you think about small scale objects, you know, like think about a prayer book or a locket, or better yet, a Hot Wheels car or a dollhouse, right? Think about the preciousness and the privateness of that experience. It's really a individual type of thing that's facilitated by the scale. It belongs to you, right? And you can choose to share it with other people or you cannot. When we look at really grand works of art, monumentally scaled, think the Statue of Liberty or the St. Louis Arch, those are communal expressions that we experience together. We go to movie theaters and we sit in darkened theaters, they say, to hear 20-foot tall heads utter the words that we can't bear to say to one another. And that becomes a communal experience. And one of my favorite things, when we used to go to movies, remember when we used to go to movies? And to watch other people watch the movie.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating way to read how people actually function with that thing. Mm-hmm. Now I'm working somewhere in between this life-size scale. And that's because I don't want to make these people monumental. And I don't want to make them precious. I want to make the viewer, hopefully, if this theory has any water to it, give the work the same respect and consideration that they would an individual of the same size. So that we're confronted by something that's akin to us. And so we have to process it in that way. We process it as something that is an individual. And so it doesn't have to be a person for this to work, right?
Yeah.
But there is something fascinating to think about why somebody would choose to work monumental and what function does that have in society and why somebody would choose to work small. And then here I am working at this scale with a very particular kind of purpose in mind and the hope, right? The hope that it functions the way that I think it does. Proof is in the pudding. You really got to wait for the feedback on this. The art historians are all sitting on the bench.
I hope so.
And writing essays, I hope.
Well, how about, so not just scale. I mean, what about the doubled figure here? And I know some of them appear to be more like mirror images, but this one is not.
Yeah.
This is like two images of cat. And kind of, could you talk about that a little?
Yeah. I'm going to talk about it through the experience of another artist. And I'll pick Andy Warhol, because most people know Andy Warhol's paintings of soup cans, and they know Andy Warhol's portraits of celebrities. And Andy Warhol is somebody who used repetition in his work a lot. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good, when in doubt, repeat yourself is a mantra that most artists should utilize. But Andy Warhol also did a series called the Death and Disaster series, where he explored things like the electric chair and overturned car accidents and pictures of Jacqueline Kennedy after the Kennedy assassination and her mourning period. And, you know, I think his gallery owners and his critics were rightly like, why are you making these depressing images? And he said, I want to make it like wallpaper. and the most Warholian kind of cryptic answer that he could give. And what I think he meant was, is somebody who was two really real things in his life. Andy Warhol was both intensely Catholic and intensely gay, somebody who went to mass every day. And I think he was continuously trying to square those things within himself. And so as somebody whose theology probably instructed that he would burn in hell for who he was, I think he was looking at death in a way that made the tragedy more palatable. So he could make death and disaster beautiful through repetition. I'm looking at different types of tragic situations. And so I often will utilize the same type of twinning, and I think I'm doing it for the same reason. I think I'm trying to make it more beautiful to look at. I don't like to beat down the place that I come from, but it is a place that produces tough people. And that toughness is a result of our environment. And so to make it more beautiful for me allows people to approach it and to look at something that might be difficult. And the beauty will beguile them long enough that there may be other things that are communicated. And I'll do that a lot. I always say, hey, if it's good enough for Andy Warhol.
Right. Yeah. So
it's good enough for me.
So here's, yeah, right. Here's another one of the repeated doubled figures. And then
and it allows you, there's this kind of self-contained circulation. The human mind loves nothing better than a pattern. And I think image making is a way of pattern formation. And we're looking to not only create simple patterns like wallpaper, but also harmonics that lead to beauty and contemplation. And this is Permanent Vacation. Rob's my brother-in-law, and I caught him floating on the pool raft one day. He was on permanent vacation, and if anybody is a student of where we're from, you know that permanent vacation is it's a euphemism for being unemployed. What are you doing? I'm on permanent vacation. My only regret with this piece is he sits here and floats for all eternity in his twinned volumetric self. I should have given him like a Coors Light, something just to keep him company. But again, I think it extends the viewing time. I remember comics were really important to me. They used to come in the newspaper. I think Bill Watterson and Calvin and Hobbes, frankly, taught me more about satire and composition and integrity than almost anything I learned in school. And I remember those two panels. Remember the two panel strips, Spot the Differences?
Yeah.
So it's important that they're not the same. The brain is a pattern recognition engine. And so to give it something to chew on means it has to continue to look. If it says it's the same, it moves on. Mm-hmm. It recognizes that it's not a tiger approaching, it's just grass waving in the wind. And so our ability to pattern recognize and to ferret out information from incomplete information is really how representation in the arts works. And so now I'm somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about these things. It's a little ridiculous, but this is what artists think about. Yeah. And our time is, I think, inhabited by the minutia of what makes an image function. And we learn at school how to recognize it from masterworks. And
I'm glad
I was not a good student. Like I loved going to school. School was such a great place to be. And it didn't matter if it was elementary school or high school or college. It was a real refuge, and it was a place where people knew things, and I loved knowing things. And I was always a apt student because to me that was the most satisfying thing, was to have people tell me how things worked. That was comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you think about these things because it comes through in the work. It really enriches. As some people know, this show was originally supposed to happen in June 2020. Because of the pandemic and things just started reopening, we didn't go through with the physical exhibition at the time, and we're able, graciously, you allowed us to put on our very first virtual exhibition on our website, and which was a lot of fun to do and figure out. But at the time, you had put me onto this recording that you had done a few years ago on the rules of productivity. And it was fascinating. I enjoyed listening you talk about these, sort of these guidelines or these things that helped you, because life is busy, right? We have things constantly pulling at us. Maybe, I know that was some 20 minutes and you don't have to go into all of that, but maybe just talk a little bit about what keeps you working as an artist, in every day with everything going on around you.
It's difficult sometimes, but I think in addition to the other things I say that my work is about, one of the things that my work is about is our relationship to work. And what I learned growing up where I did was about different types of work. My dad was a lineman and a farmer. My mom sold Shackley out of our house, and work was something that we engaged in as a family. My kitten's over here. And so there was no separation between our family life and our working life. My dad worked for Consumers Energy full-time. He farmed full-time on top of that. It was a great way to lose money slowly, but it taught me about work and made me at an early age think about our relationship with work. And when I got to art school, I was actually like, oh, if I just work a quarter as hard as the people I grew up with, I should be able to make this work somehow. And so it was important for me to look at both the industrial settings that Flint is famous for, right? And I wish more of our history of the industrial and social revolutions that passed through and happened in Flint had been taught to me. I had to go away to learn about a lot of things. But if you think about the assembly line process and some of the advantages of industrialization that come through standardization of parts and mass production, those are good things that I could take and utilize in the studio. Because I encounter a lot of people, frankly, as artists who use what I call the big three. Mm-hmm. Why are you not making the stuff that you want to make? Well, there's three reasons, and everybody says this. I've probably said this. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough space. Mm-hmm. And excuses are great, but they're no substitute for analyzing what you're doing and getting to work. I think it was another more famous artist who said, some of us wait for inspiration, the rest of us just get to work. Because that's really what it takes. People often think that there's a mystical like art deity that comes down and touches you on the shoulder and says, you have talent. Unfortunately, a lot of people learn the hard way that it's like, it isn't talent. It's consistently being able to get up and face rejection and to make things that don't work and to discover systems for yourself that work. And I think that the talk that you're referring to, I talk about how important it is just by looking at other artists you admire, you can analyze what rules they follow. And so if you endeavor to be like Cindy Sherman or Rembrandt or Chuck Close or anybody that you admire, you can look at it and you can reverse engineer what their rules for production are. If we take somebody, with a big enough name that people might know, Chuck Close paints large scale portraits. And that's one of his rules. Chuck Close paints large scale portraits. He doesn't paint landscapes. He doesn't do Archie comics. This is what he does. So that eliminates all the other possibilities for him. So when he wakes up in the morning and says, well, I'm gonna go in the studio and make something, every single possibility but portraiture he has pushed off the board. And so what he's making is defined for him. He also generally works with a small number of materials. So we could say primarily works in paint. He's worked in paper pulp and other things. You might look at my work and say primarily works in denim, sometimes other things. And so all the other decisions about materiality have been pushed to the side. So if you think about what Chuck Close has to do every day, he's eliminated 99.9% of all the decisions. And that allows you to get to work and to focus on, now, how do I do it different? And maybe that's the bigger challenge, is how do you make your work in such a way that it elevates itself beyond the background noise? We have a lot of competition for our attention, and here is yet one more individual asking for it. I think there are good ways to ask for attention and there are bad ways to ask for attention. Try to be good. Often joke that I'm a bad man who wakes up and pretends to be good. And I think that you can request people's attention through sincerity, through earnestness, through beauty, even through devotion, right? I've been doing this for a long time. So that I hope that a few people will take the time to look, and you know, that's an ask. I'm asking for something. And so at the same time that I'm asking, I always try to give. What am I going to give back as an artist? I'm going to give people something unexpected, something that they hopefully will enjoy. Maybe something that brings beauty, meaning, or structure to their world. Maybe they'll have an opportunity to see themselves in kind of a large philosophical way. Maybe the seeing themselves represented is what I can do for people as an artist. And I'm an artist who takes our role in society maybe a bit too seriously. Maybe I take myself a bit too seriously. But I'm always thinking about what the role of the artist should be in society. And for me, particularly, it isn't to chase commercial success. It has been to chase meaning and to chase knowledge and to share, to really tap into that sense of generosity. And just to bring that full circle, this is when I'll ask people to bring in little short stacks of jeans that they've laundered. Because it works. I'm really surprised. I give a little, people give back to me. And that's how this transaction functions. And I incorporate them into the work, so much so that people will walk up to me and they'll say, that right there, those are my jeans. I recognize where I spilled the paint from when I was painting the porch. And they get to be artists too. And I think that is maybe one of the better things that my work does for people.
Yeah, that is a great experience. Wow. And of course, you've become so attached to your favorite jeans, or even your second favorite jeans, you know, until the first favorite jeans you wear out and you have to move on. But I'm sure they recognize them.
I think I've said that they're the only garment that we own that we wear out. We don't wear our underwear like this. We replace our underwear, and we change our shirts. But your favorite pair of jeans have a staying power, unlike other garments. That is an interesting thing for an artist to think about. And I do enjoy the intimate aspects of how much people cherish and the preferences that they express. And you know, the battle between traditional denim and stretch. That's these are the things that consume.
Oh, I imagine. So stretch denim would be a very different. Do you use it then?
When necessary. There are legitimate functions for stretch denim.
Uh-huh.
As somebody who wants to manipulate it myself, I can tell you that, like, cutting through it with my 19th century tailor shears is not the most enjoyable experience. But just mentioning the type of equipment that goes into making these, a lot of the stuff is made with industrial level equipment. I take kind of that exploration of work further by looking into industrial processes and rescuing those machines and restoring those machines so that they can have a second life. And if you think about these pieces, really this was denim that wasn't brand new, right? This is denim destined for the scrap bin. And so this is a way for me to extend and to talk about value and to repair and to reinvigorate and perhaps remind people what the value of their endeavors can be, and as a way to explore how do we define value in our society. Is it through the type of work that we engage in? Is it the way in which we structure our working day? Is it the equipment and the way in which some of the old processes might be better than the new processes? And so, although those things are not on display to be seen, those are the things that make my working life as an artist what I call whole. The type of work I engage in is work that is whole. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the difference between working a job where your life is not in your control entirely, and working at something where it is whole. And maybe I discovered that difference. A farm working life is a closed loop where you make all the decisions. You decide what to plant, when to plant it, what time to get up, when to quit working. Those are all decisions you get to engage in. Versus maybe an assembly line process where you're told what to do and the part comes by and you do it, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. Those are different forms of work. We call them the same thing, but they are, one, I think, is a enjoyable, less burdensome endeavor, and one might be profitable, but maybe not as satisfying for the human soul. I wish I could get that stuff in the pictures.
Well, you know, just to skip back just a second, you mentioned giving, saving, these old industrial sewing machines from scrap and giving them a new life. You're taking the secondhand jeans and you're giving them a new life from where they would have been, at also discarded. But these people, these individuals whom you know and love, you are also giving them a second life in this art and in their representation. It's really, yeah. It's several folds and maybe more.
That's one of the things that art does, is it allows us to time travel. Sometimes into the future. Like these pieces will travel into the future. I know I've stood in front of paintings and you bridge a few centuries back and you discover you discover, like me, that a lot of the people that you understand and resonate most with have been dead several centuries. But I do think it is a way of extending value, of time traveling a little bit, and maybe coming through the work is some of the ethos of how I desire our working lives to be and what I hope for others by performatively engaging in work that models that. Because I do believe that most people who are allowed to have more voice in how their work is performed and the end product of that work they often don't end up making missile systems that we launch into mud huts in countries around the world. They make meaningful things, they make beautiful things. And I think that might be, whether it's making an Afghan, right, for somebody that you care about, or starting a business for yourself. Those are things that people know that they'll never work harder at, but they invest so much of themselves in it, and what they get out of it might be equal to what they invest. And so that's definitely something that I think about, and along with sustainability, right? I think we have an obligation to do better. And so, like I said, I get up every day and know I'm a bad man and try to do better.
Yeah, I'm glad you do. And I'm so grateful to have this work here in Flint. Back to
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's a real honor. I am so thrilled. Honestly, it's like, this might be the most important show for me as an individual, to have my work so close to where I grew up, to know the institutions that launched the ship of me were involved. I've been to the apartment on the top of the Clinton Presidential Library. Like, those are the things that artists get to do. This is a pinnacle and a bright light in my career. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my work with so many of the people who really made it possible.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. That was so beautifully put. And I'm glad. Thank you also. And thank you. Well, for everyone out there, this has been Jim Arendt here at Buckham Gallery in Flint, Michigan. We'll be on view through July 24th and on our website at buckhamgallery.org. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.